So my name's Hayward Zwirling, and I'm a retired physician, and I retired about a year and a half ago. And when I retired, the first thing I did was, how am I going to spend my time in retirement? I'm not going to talk about the finances. What I'm going to do is we're going to talk about the medical science. And I read about more than 100 articles, and ultimately it led me to a plan of how do I structure a retirement so I maximize the chances of having a happy, healthy, and fulfilling retirement. And the first step we're going to do is I'm going to talk about the medical science, and we're going to create what I call my strategic retirement plan, which are going to be a series of objectives, which if I succeed in fulfilling them, I will likely have a happy, healthy, and fulfilling retirement. And then we'll talk about how do we actually implement that plan. When people are retired, there are stages to retirement. Stage one typically lasts a year or two, and it's basically an extended vacation. You have no responsibilities and you're playing all the time. In stage two, what happens is some people start to get bored. Some people start to regret they're retired. They lose contact with their friends from work. They lose, some people who were in high positions of power lose the fact that they're now just one of many people and then nothing special about them. That's particularly more of a problem for men. And people tend to lose what is their purpose in life because many people define their value to society by what they do. After stage two, when people are sufficiently bored, you move into stage three. And in stage three, some people start to look around for new ideas of what they're going to do so they're not bored. And the things that they feel like they've lost when they retired, they come up with new options. And that's called prototyping. And that's stage three. And the people who ultimately figure out a new purpose, a new way forward, then move on to stage four, where they basically implement what they learned in stage three, and now they have a new purpose and meaning in life, and they feel very fulfilled. So those are the four stages of retirement. People don't always go through them in this order. The time span people go through is variable. Some people will go directly from stage one to stage three. Some people will do the stages simultaneously, but that's sort of a broad picture. Now, the first study we're going to talk about is called the Harvard Study of Adult Development. And this is an amazing study. It started back in 1938, and it's been going on continuously since then. And what they did back in 1938 is they recruited about 250 college sophomores to enter this study, and they told them they were going to be followed for the rest of their life. So this is an elite group. It's called the Grant Study. And then there was a second group of low-income teenagers in Boston who were in a separate study unrelated to the first. And the second study was started by two Harvard law professors. And they were trying to understand why some kids from disadvantaged homes found themselves in legal trouble at a higher percentage than people who came from more well-to-do circumstances. So they recruited 450 or so low-income teenagers who had not gotten into any trouble and asked them, we want to study you for the rest of your life to figure out why you haven't gotten into legal trouble when so many of your peers had. These two groups got combined into one study. And now it's called the Harvard Study for Adult Development. And it's been going on continuously, as I said, since 1938. Well, the first thing that came out of this study, which was totally unexpected, is when they asked people the question, what makes people happy? Over the years, the most important thing that people answered was having many meaningful social relations. That was the most important determinant of happiness. And it turned out not only was it the most important determinant of happiness, but it correlated with better health and actually living longer. So having a lot of close friends actually increases longevity. They also found in the Harvard study having a sense of purpose and meaning in life and being physically active also cause people to be happy. We're going to talk about those in a second. Female friendships tend to be more what they call face-to-face friendships, where you're sitting and talking and you're conveying information that has emotional value. Male friendships are side by side, working next to each other, playing tennis together, something like that. And those friendships are what I refer to as sort of instrumental friendships. They're relationships more of a convenience, out out of a joint activity. These friendships are less durable. So when men quit work, they lose a lot of their friends because they don't have the high value that women to women friendships have. So as a result of that, when men retire, what happens is all of a sudden they have fewer social activities and they start to piggyback on their wife's social activities, which creates problems for their wives who didn't really want them there in the first place. So men have a problem when they retire and they start losing all their work friends. We all know that there's an epidemic of what's called loneliness in America and around the world. And it turns out being lonely has serious health and psychiatric consequences. And in fact, in Great Britain, they've actually appointed a minister of health, of loneliness, who basically has the same stature as the Minister of Defense and so forth, to try to figure out what do they need to do to reduce this problem of loneliness, which is really very costly in terms of health. And on this graph here, this is a time study where they looked at what people did over at a particular age. So here at age 45, you spent about an hour a day with your friends, an hour and a half a day with your family and siblings, a couple of 2 hours, 2.5 hours with your kids, but you spend 5 or 6 hours alone. And as you get older, people are more alone. Having many meaningful social relationships correlates with happiness, but it also correlates with a lot of other beneficial things. Depression levels are much lower in people who have many meaningful social relationships. People have a greater sense of purpose, and we're going to talk about that in a second. They have better memory function, executive function, ability to think clearly, better cardiometabolic health 10 years down the road. This is heart disease, lower heart disease. So having many meaningful social relations not only makes you happier, but it has psychological benefits and it has physical benefits to your health. Most of you probably know who Kurt Vonnegut is. He wrote Slaughterhouse-Five and many other books. I'm just going to paraphrase this paragraph that he gave at a lecture. And to paraphrase it, he said to the audience, "We were meant to live in extended families. Do what you can to get yourself extended families, no matter how arbitrary they may be. They do not have to be high-grade people either. They can be imbeciles. What matters is numbers." Having a lot of meaningful social relationships is important. Quality is important. Quantity is also important. But it turns out if you have to choose quality or quantity, choose quality. That has the bigger health benefit. So I said in the beginning, we're going to create a strategic retirement plan. What are the objectives on our strategic retirement plan to ensure we have a happy, healthy, and fulfilling retirement? Well, we just talked about meaningful social relationships. It has benefits of happiness, cognitive health, which is thinking, mental health, psychological, psychiatric problems, physical health, longevity, and people feel fulfilled. So we're going to put on the top of our strategic retirement plan, augment the number of meaningful social relations. Next, we're going to talk about a sense of purpose and meaning. The Harvard study has already told us that this purpose and meaning correlates with happiness. And I already mentioned when people retire, a lot of people lose their sense of purpose and meaning in life. But first, I just want to define what is the sense of purpose and meaning. And the way I see it is a sense of purpose is, what am I doing today? Is it valuable for the future? And meaning is when I look back on what I've done, was there value in it? It turns out the great philosophers, going back to Aristotle and Plato, have debated what these words mean, meaning and purpose. But everybody, even though there's no good definitive definition, everybody agrees it's important. I've put together a definition that works for me, which is the individual believes that they have lived a life which meets their own expectations, meaning, and gives them a reason to look forward to tomorrow, to getting up and doing something tomorrow, purpose. You don't have to be a saint to have purpose and meaning in your life. Everybody gets to define this for themselves. So the criminals who are out robbing banks probably say, yeah, I've got purpose and meaning in my life. My purpose is to steal money from the wealthy and give it to me. And so you don't have to be a saint to have purpose and meaning, and you get to define this for yourself. Now, this is a study of almost 7,000 patients. And what they did in this study is, this is what's called a Kaplan-Meier survival curve. So on this axis is survival time in months. So this is about 6 years out. And here on this axis, the percentage of people who are still alive. So at the beginning of the study, 1 or 100% of people are alive. At the beginning of the study, people complete a survey. And the survey divides people up into how high a life purpose they have based on a psychological test. So you have people who have a very high sense of purpose in life, and then you have the average, and then you have people who have really no sense of purpose in life. And then they just watched who is alive every month thereafter. And what they found is that if you get out to 70 months, people with the highest sense of purpose, 89% were still alive. Where people with the lowest sense of purpose, only about 72% were still alive. So just having a sense of purpose and meaning means you will live longer. So this is an important concept that we need to put on our strategic retirement plan. So, strategic retirement plan. We've already talked about meaningful social relationships. Now we're going to put on it as our second evidence-based objective, to find a sense of purpose and meaning, because the benefits include happiness, mental health, heart health, longevity, and a sense of fulfillment. The Harvard study also found that being physically active correlates with happiness. And there have been lots of studies. This was a very large study, which included 23 trials. And what they found is that when you group the trials based on what type of trials they are, and there are different ways of conducting studies, for the 15 observational studies, there was a positive association between physical activity and happiness. So in the randomized trials, they found that exercise seemed to improve happiness. But the authors used the word suggested. This is what's called a control trial on physical activity. And what they did in this study is there were 3 groups. In group number 1, that was a group that was going to the gym. In group number 2, that was a group that was just about to start going to the gym regularly. And group number 3 watched TV all the time. That was the control group. All right. And then what they looked at is they measured happiness in the groups after 4 and 8 weeks. And what they found was the people who were the happiest were the people who were going to the gym in the first group regularly. The next happiest group was the people who went just starting to go to the gym, and the least happy were the ones who were sitting around at home. The longer people exercised and the more vigorous they exercised, the happier they were. So the conclusion of the study was any exercise is better than no exercise. A lot of exercise is better than a little exercise. Now, the amount of exercise seems to correlate with happiness. In this study, they looked at the amount of exercise as it correlates with years of life gained. And just pick one out. If we look at women who are the age 65, okay, people who exercise 0.5 to 2 hours a week, okay, will live at 65 about 3 years longer than people who don't exercise at all. On the other hand, women who exercise more than 5.5 hours a week at 65 will actually live 7 years longer than women who don't exercise at all. And there's a lot of data that shows that the more you exercise, the better. But any exercise, no matter how little, even just going for a walk, is much better than doing nothing. If they compared the people who didn't exercise to the group who was most active, at the age of 60, men and women, if they're very active, will live about 12 years longer. At the age of 90, if you start exercising, you will live about 5 years longer versus no exercise at all. This is a lot of data, and I'm not going to go through this, but it's all available. But what it shows you is that for each bad habit, sedentary means not active, hypertension, blood pressure not controlled, obesity, diabetes, smoking. So if you have all of these adverse risk factors, you're not active, you have poorly controlled blood pressure, you're obese, and you smoke, at age 70, your chances of getting to 90 is only 4%. On the other hand, if all of those things are treated properly, and you're not smoking, you're exercising, you're doing everything that you should, a 7-year-old has a 54% chance of getting to age 90. So doing what everybody knows is the right thing to do really has consequences on how long you're going to live. This is a very big study, 143 studies, okay? They assessed 100 health outcomes. And what they found is just going out being out in nature has health benefits. And that's one of the reasons cities like Cambridge and Somerville have been pushing to get trees in and getting green space. Just getting out in green space lowers your blood pressure, lowers your heart rate, reduces your stress hormones, decreases the risk of diabetes 28%, decreases total mortality 31%, and decreases heart disease about 16%. And this big study concluded a preponderance of the evidence showed that exposure to the great outdoors has mental and physical benefits. Now, we just talked about how exercise is important. This study looked at exercise and compared exercising indoors to exercising outdoors, and another study compared exercising in the city, and another study looked at exercise in green space. And the conclusion of all these studies was no exercise inactive is not healthy. Exercising indoors is good. Exercising outdoors in the city is better. And exercising outdoors amongst the trees is even better still in terms of your overall health. So if you have a choice, go do your yoga or Pilates in a park as opposed to in a gym. A brief comment about dementia. Age is on the left column. About 20-25% of people are diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment, pretty much consistently for all ages above 65. And the risk of dementia goes up as you get older. At 65, it's 3%. Over in the 90, it's about a third. And there are certain what are called risk factors for dementia. High blood pressure, decreased hearing. Anybody who's been told their hearing is not good should get a hearing aid. We know that hearing aids reduce the risk of dementia. Smoking, obesity, all of these are risk factors. Although we don't have data that treating these things reduce the risk of dementia, except for the hearing aid one. Every physician tell you we should have your blood pressure under control. You need a hearing aid. Obviously, you need to stop smoking, and so forth. People have been told that doing cognitive activities reduces the risk of dementia. And this study looked at that. And what they found is certain cognitive or thinking activities seems to have a slightly reduces the risk of dementia by 7 to 11%. Writing letters, journaling, using a computer, taking educational classes, playing games, card games, chess, crossword puzzles, reading the newspaper, magazines, books, artwork, crafts, woodworking. All of these slightly reduce the risk of getting dementia. Okay. However, right now, there is no data that says that we have anything that can really reverse dementia. There are some drugs that slow down the progression, but nothing that reverses the process or stops it from going forward. Nevertheless, every physician will tell you all of these risk factors should be treated. We talked about exercise and how it has benefits in terms of happiness, thinking health, psychological health, physical health, longevity and fulfillment, and preferably exercise out amongst the trees if you can. So we're going to add that as the next item objective on our strategic retirement plan. Turns out volunteering has a large number of health benefits. It decreases the risk of depression, overall happiness, a sense of well-being, physical health, lower risk of dying, a greater sense of purpose. It has many, many benefits, but it has to be volunteering, which is called altruistic volunteering. If you're volunteering because your spouse told you you need to go out and serve soup in the kitchen, that's not going to have the health benefits that this altruistic volunteering does. And the reason we think this is the case, that altruistic volunteering has all these health benefits, is that people's stress hormones go down when they're doing something that they feel good about. For the person who's volunteering, but is really sort of counting the clock and saying, when can I get out of here? That person is still under a high level of stress and it doesn't have the health benefits. So we're going to add the next thing on our strategic retirement plan is altruistic volunteer activity, because it has benefits in terms of health, physical and mental health, longevity, increases the number of meaningful social relationships, and a sense of purpose in life. In 2010, there was a study done by two Nobel laureates in economics who basically said once you earn $75,000 a year, having more money doesn't make you happier. Then there was another study done in 2021, which basically refuted that and said, no, there is no cutoff threshold. More money is happier. Now, these are all top-notch academics. These two won the Nobel laureate. This guy is an economics professor at Princeton. These guys are both at Princeton. Kahneman and Killingsworth of the second study got together, pulled all their data together, and brought in a third academic, another economist from Princeton, trying to understand why they got different answers. At the beginning of the study, you measure how happy people are. And you group them into quartiles, the happiest group, the middle happy group, and the least happy group. In the people who are very unhappy, all right, as their income level rose up to 100,000 in 2022 was the same as 75,000 in the first study. As their income rose from 0 to 100,000, they got happier. But once they started earning more money, they didn't get any happier beyond that. On the other hand, for everybody else, as their income went up, they got still happier. And the people in the happiest group, they got the most happy when their income went up. It's as if there's a control in the brain that basically says giving you something makes you a little bit happy or a lot more happy. And depending on how that control is probably set, that's why this group that is basically unhappy to begin with, once they got their food, shelter, and clothing needs met, giving them more money didn't help them. So now we know, yes, happiness correlates with income unless you're in that 15% group that is least happy to begin with. How do you spend your money to keep you happy? And it turns out there are studies that look at this. If you're going to spend your money, you should spend it on experiences, not on items. So there's something called hedonic adaptation. You go out and buy a new phone or a car or something. Everybody's really excited for the first weeks or months or year that they got this nice new shiny object. After 6 months of the new phone, it's just a phone. It's nothing special anymore. Now, what happens is some people realize they're no longer happy, and now there's a new iPhone. They're going to go out, and that's going to make them really happy. And that's called the hedonic treadmill. They keep buying things to make themselves happy, but it's all temporary. On the other hand, if they, instead of spending their money on objects, if they spend it on experiences, that will make them happy. And if they spend it on experiences with others, that will make them still happy more than if they do it by themselves. And so for people who buy objects, the happiness goes up when they get it, and then the happiness comes down. For people who have experiences with others, what happens is the happiness goes up for the rest of their lives because they relive those incidents with the people. They'll look at photographs and remember when, or that trip we went on. So if you're going to spend your money, spend it on experiences and shared experiences, because that's where you'll be happier in the long run. Physical activity, spend it on things that are physically active or mentally challenging activities. Invest to promote social interactions. Take your friends out to a coffee shop and talk and pay for them. That will make you more happy than just going out and buying a bagel and going for a walk. Spend your money for those who can afford to spend your money to acquire free time and use that free time then to have more meaningful social relations. So don't spend your money to get somebody to do a task for you and then just sit around and do nothing. Use that time in a way that we know is valuable. If you're going to spend money on others, spend it to facilitate face-to-face interaction, spend it on your family and friends. And if you're going to make charitable contributions, it has to be something you sincerely believe is going to make a difference. If you're doing it out of guilt, it's not going to make you happy in the long run. Invest your money in a way that makes you happy in the long term. Briefly, we're going to talk about what is happiness. And happiness is, by the psychologists, they define happiness as three components: enjoyment, satisfaction, and meaning. And enjoyment is broken down into pleasure, appreciation, and knowledge. And just to define this, pleasure is sort of happiness in the moment. you like to ski and you're going down the slope and that rush of excitement, that's pleasure. Appreciation or knowledge is a longer form of happiness. You go to a museum or you go to a concert and you already know a little bit about the artist and you learn something more, or you learn something new. So these are sort of more long-term enjoyments. Satisfaction is what you have divided by what you want. All right. So your satisfaction can go up because you buy more things, although we've already established that's temporary. Or you can decide you don't need half the shit that you already have and get rid of it and just reorient yourself to the reality and decide all of that other stuff is irrelevant. And the last component is, are you having a meaningful life? Half of our happiness comes from our genes, from twin studies, it tells us that. So you can't affect that. About a quarter comes from our circumstances. And it's limited from most people, you're limited on how much you could change it. But the other quarter comes from our habits. And that's something that you can change. And we're going to talk about changing habits in a second. This is a cool graph. This is happiness over a lifetime. All right. So on this axis, on the y-axis, is happiness. At the top, people are very happy. At the bottom, they're not so happy. Okay. And on this axis is age, from age 18 to age 80. This blue line, this dotted blue line, is the data from the US. And what happens is at 18, people are pretty happy. By the time they finish college, they're a lot less happy. They start to get happier until around the age of 35. And then their happiness starts to go down. Typically, that correlates with our midlife crisis. And then as they start to retire, their happiness goes up. It turns out there are certain variables that we know affect happiness, which are culturally dependent. In the US, those culturally dependent items are education level, marital status, and employment status. And you correct for those effects. You just want to see what is happiness over time, independent of marriage, independent of education, and independent of employment. And you get this gray curve that sort of curves like that, with a low point that corresponds to basically a midlife crisis approximately. So that's in the US. Well, it turns out this curve is the same around the world. When they do this study around the world and they correct for the local confounding variables, so all they're really measuring is absolute happiness, all around the world, all cultures, all societies have this gray happiness curve. People who run the zoos are constantly rating how happy their monkeys are, the lions, and so forth. In those animals, they get the same curve. Midlife, they're happy when they're young, least happy in midlife, and they're really happy at the end. So this curve, this U-shaped curve, is sort of a fundamental part of our biology and is across all cultures. I only want to talk about one thing on this slide, negativity bias. The human brain is a remarkable organ, and it's the one we know the least about. But humans have what's called a negativity bias. A greater amount of our brain is devoted to remembering bad things than good things. And it turns out this negativity bias is an evolutionary advantage. So imagine you're on the plains of Africa, you have a negativity bias, you're walking up the hill, you can't see over the crest, but you know there are blueberries on the other side. And as you get close to the crest of the hill, you say, whoa, I better check and make sure there's not a lion on the other side that's going to eat me when I pop my head over. Good survival instinct. On the other end, if you have a positivity bias, you're walking up the hill and say, oh, I'm getting so close, I'm going to run right over the top and right into the mouth of the lion. So our gene pool got edited down because a negativity bias was a survival advantage. But it also comes to this day, it sort of drags us down. But it's important to be aware of it. Now, there are things we can do to make ourselves more happy. There's a hormone called oxytocin, which is made in the brain, which, amongst other things, can make us more happy. You can increase your oxytocin level with certain activities. Petting your dog, intimacy, volunteering, eye contact, meaningful social reactions, listening to music, exercise, laughter. All of those will raise your oxytocin levels and make you happy. Right? The only thing I'm going to say about this slide is that this was a genetic study that looked at happiness and how our genes function. And what it showed was the psychological testing that determines how happy we are has a basis in the biology of how our genes work. Martin Seligman, who created the field of positive psychology, and in 1998, he decided that instead of studying people who have anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, all the diseases you've heard about, he decided he was going to make the American Psychological Association study people who had no psychological diseases, with the idea that if they learn what makes these people happy and tick, that it will have applications for the rest of the population. One of the things he came up with is something called the Hope Circuit. If you're thinking something that's negative, by consciously trying to remember something positive, you can block the effect of that negative thought so it's not as prominent in your psyche. And they have some remarkable experiments that they did in rats that show exactly that. There's something else called opposite signal strategy, and that is to redirect harmful behavior or alter your environment when you're doing something that you know is bad. You want to replace a bad habit with a good habit. Example that they gave was somebody who was working in an academic situation, and every day at 11 o'clock or 10 o'clock, he went down to the cafeteria and he had a donut. And he was trying to lose weight, and needless to say, the donut wasn't helping. As a good scientist, he said, well, why do I do this? I know I shouldn't go down and do it. And he created a list of hypotheses as to why he was going down to do this when he knows rationally he shouldn't. And he tested his hypothesis, and it turned out there were 4 possibilities. The one that turned out to be the issue was he was looking for companionship. So now when that donut urge strikes at 10, he just walks up from his desk and goes to the office next door and sits down and chats. Does that for a brief period of time, and is able to go back, and the donut is no longer an issue. That's an example of opposite signal strategy. You can make yourself happy with a gratitude journal. And this is very popular now, writing down all the things in a diary that you should be grateful for. You're not looking to write bad things down. This gets back to all the other stuff we talked about the brain and how it works. You just want to remember all the good stuff. And that has a strong effect on anxiety and depression. You can make yourself happy, as we talked about, oxytocin. Just get a dog and start hugging your dog. So for the last thing on our strategic retirement plan, hack your brain to augment happiness. There are things you can do daily to make yourself happier. Now, a quick caveat about all those studies. Many of these studies, the study population is not representative of America. They're typically white, educated population. So to say that all of the data on which all the studies I told you about were based applies to everybody is a leap of faith. It may be true, but that's not what the study didn't answer those questions. Maybe certain interventions work better in certain ethnic groups than others. We don't know the answer to that. The other thing is, just because something is correlated doesn't mean it's the cause of. For example, ice cream consumption is correlated with drowning. Now, if you eat ice cream, doesn't mean you're going to drown, all right? But we know there's a correlation. Well, why is that? Well, people eat more ice cream on hot summer days. People go to the beach on hot summer days. More people drown when they're at the beach. Therefore, there's a correlation between ice cream consumption and drowning, but they're not causative. A and B are correlated doesn't mean A causes B. There could be an intervening step that we don't understand. So I already went through the strategic retirement plan, the 6 things. Now I have to add what is important to me. And I kept an online diary. What I discovered after reading over my diary for a year, the things that were important to me is meaningful social interactions, no surprise. Exercise, no surprise. Learn something new. That was important to me, even though we haven't covered it. An absence of stressful activities, creating or making something, and an interest in learning about the secular spiritual world. I come from a very academic background with lots of numbers, and I wanted to learn about the other side of the world. So now I have my strategic retirement plan. The first 6 things were based on science, so these apply to everybody. The second group of 4 applied to me. So if you were to do this, probably we'll have a different set of 4 things at the bottom. So now for the last 10 minutes, what I want to do is tell you, how do I make this come to life? So the first thing on my strategic retirement plan was increase the number of meaningful social relations. And these are the things that I tried. I went to the Somerville Council on Aging, 6 months, and I decided that really wasn't doing what I wanted, so I stopped going. I went to the Somerville Council on Aging monthly men's talk group. That didn't work for me either, so I stopped doing that. And then I implemented all these other things. I created a monthly retirement brunch group for a group of men in Davis Square. I attend a lot of the MIT Club of Boston social events. I created at my house what I call it last summer and fall a shoot the shit salon, where I just send an email to the people in my neighborhood. I say Friday, 5:30 to 7, my backyard. Show up if you like. Bring a beverage if you want. We'll have fruit, vegetables, nuts. Sometimes it would only be one person. Sometimes it would be seven, and we'd sit around and talk. So it was really a successful way of bringing the community together and creating meaningful social relations. I created a pickleball league for alumni at MIT. That didn't really result in meaningful social relations. Talk to strangers, the train experiment. People get on the train. At the beginning of the study, at the beginning of the train ride, the scientist says to groups of people, divided them into two groups, we're going to interview you at the end of this train ride, and we're going to ask you about the trip. And the other group, they say, we're going to interview you at the end, but we want you to sit next to somebody and talk to them. Try to initiate a conversation with a stranger. And at the end of the trip, they asked everybody, how was your train ride? The people who forced themselves to talk to a stranger all said they were going to do that from now on because it was such a much better trip than it would have been if they just sat with their nose in the book or in their iPhone. So I make a point of trying to talk to strangers. There's a book written by David Brooks, How to Know a Person, which is how to encourage meaningful conversations. I read that book. I outlined it. I read it twice. I tried to read over my notes. I can't really change how I interact. I'm just not that disciplined. But it's a very good guide if you want to really understand how to have meaningful conversations with people. Things that I might try in the future are listed at the bottom. One of the things that is important that is intergenerational interactions between seniors and younger people has a lot of benefits. Reduced anxiety, better thinking, better social, mental, physical health amongst the seniors. So if you can get into a situation when you're interacting with younger people, you should do that. So that was the first thing on my list. Now, you have to anticipate what I call tactical failures. All of these things I tried, many of them have not worked, all right? And I like Leonardo da Vinci's quote the best, and if the above effect is not obtained, waste no more time on it. And for those things that didn't work for me, I just move on. The second thing on my strategic retirement plan was to find a sense of purpose and meaning. So for me, the sense of purpose and meaning, which I've defined for myself, is create something that engages others emotionally, intellectually, or is valued by others. For example, on the Somerville Community Path is an elephant sculpture and a giraffe that I made some years ago. Every time I walk by it and I see somebody play with it, it makes me smile. I have added something of value. And that's what my purpose in life is, to create something that causes somebody else to smile or think a thought they haven't thought about, somehow to look at the world differently. I write on my blog, and I'll get emails from people who read the articles. They're engaged and they're thinking about something they hadn't thought about. To me, that is adding value to the world. So that's my sense of purpose. How people are going to find their sense of purpose and meaning, there isn't any manual I can give you on how to do it. You can Google sense of purpose and meaning, and there'll be lots of people who tell you how to go about finding a sense of purpose and meaning. There's a famous author, a psychiatrist, Viktor Frankl, who was actually in a Nazi concentration camp, and he continued to be a psychiatrist when he was in the Nazi concentration camp, and ultimately wrote a book in 1946, which the Library of Congress said was one of the 10 most important books written at the time. And he said, a purpose and meaning comes from completing tasks, caring for another person, and facing suffering with dignity. And maybe that's what it comes down to. But everybody's got to define this for themselves, but not to define it as I showed you on the slide earlier, means you're not going to live as long. I would also say, keep an open mind. If an opportunity comes up upon you, someone says, let's go do this, your default answer should be yes. Always expose yourself to new opportunities. We talked about physical activity, and what I do is I cycle the Minuteman Bike Trail, Somerville Community Path, a couple of times a week. For people who are thinking about aging, there's a link to exercise. Many people think that they can't do exercise, they're too old or they're too infirm. The National Institute of Health has a YouTube video on it, and there are multiple sources where you can look it up and say, okay, how do I go about it in an exercise program? And if you're not sure, start with your doctor. All right, they'll be able to refer you either to a physical therapy program or something that's appropriate. Any exercise is better than doing nothing. Participate in altruistic volunteer activities. If you don't know what to do, you can go to this website, you put in your zip code, and they'll tell you what opportunities are available. There are a large number of health benefits and psychological benefits from doing volunteer work, but it has to be something you really want to do. Maintain an openness to experimenting with new ideas. If somebody says, why don't you come to the soup kitchen and help me do this? You're not committed for more than one time, but see if it's something that adds value to your life. I try to spend my money on things that involve, that are experiential, social interactions, shared experiences. If I have a choice of going to the museum alone or going anywhere alone or with my wife, it is always better if I go with my wife because I have somebody to talk to and share the joy. It's like, oh my God, look at that remarkable painting. It has more value to me. And then it's something we end up talking about sometime down the road. The sixth thing was on the strategic retirement plan, hack your brain to augment happiness. And the reason I told you before about the enjoyment is a component of this pleasure, appreciation, knowledge, what you have, what you want. You can focus on any one of these things. You can say, okay, I'm just going to go skiing more often. Okay. I was in a work situation as a physician where I got to the point where I felt like the system didn't let me take care of the patients in the way I thought they should be taken care of. And that created an incredible amount of stress that I wasn't doing and I quit. And what I changed is this ratio of what you have and what you want. What I wanted wasn't to be a physician at this point. I wanted to get rid of the stress. So I changed that denominator, which made me a lot happier from the day I did it. So you can make yourself happy by focusing on each one of these. Maybe for some people, it's just going to listen to more music. Maybe others, it's going to museums. Intellectual activities. We live in Boston. There are a shitload of free intellectual activities in the Boston area, more than you can attend. This is up online. I actually teach a class at the Cambridge Center for Adulthood, this lecture, but it's an hour and a half. One of the things that I would encourage you to do, if you haven't, there are free audiobooks and books you can get, digital books that you can download on your phone. The numbers that are free, anything that was published probably before copyright, which is probably before 1940, almost all of it is available for free. If you're comfortable playing with a computer and you haven't played with ChatGPT, you should do it. It is amazing. Say to ChatGPT, my significant other's name is such and such. These are his or her interests. This is what we like to do together, blah, 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 blah. Create a poem where each line starts with a letter of the alphabet, no more than 20 lines, go. And it will do it. It's absolutely mind-boggling. And it's free. You should play with ChatGPT if you're not doing it already. For me, putting this Designing Your Retirement lecture together is part of my intellectual activity. I spent all day yesterday reviewing my notes. I talked about avoiding needless stress activity. So this is, again, one of my items. I don't get into political conversations that I know are a dead end. Nobody changes their mind. All I do is get stressed out. Next to last thing on my strategic retirement plan was engage in creative activities. And I have my hobbies of woodworking. I do some photography and I do blogging, and that's what keeps me entertained. And the last thing was I said I wanted to explore the secular world, and I tried meditation, and that just didn't work. I think I want to try hallucinogenics. I'm going to go forward with that in the near future. So all of that stuff is very important that you approach retirement in a very deliberative manner. So every day I get up, and the first thing I do is I go down, grab a cup of coffee, I look at my calendar, and I check my email, and I start saying, okay, what can I add to my calendar to keep me busy? When people work, you're busy all the time. You have kids, you've got your job, and so forth. All of a sudden in retirement, you have all this free time, you have no activities. If you don't spend time actually scheduling activities, you're going to be sitting around with too much free time. And what the science tells us is if you want to break a bad habit, you cannot use willpower to do it. You have to change the environment or introduce friction that interferes with the old bad habit. And in my case, the way I did it was I just put my calendar on the kitchen counter next to the coffee pot. So when I come down, it's staring me in the face. And that worked. So to sum up, designing your retirement. There are the 6 steps from the strategic retirement plan. These apply to everybody. Then you have to sit down and think, what are your individual goals and aspirations? And add that in a meaningful way. You don't want to add, okay, I want to do a trip to London. That's really part of what's called the tactical plan. What you want is, I want to see the world, or I want to see a certain type of culture or so. Big, broad ideas. And after you create the strategic retirement plan, then you have to create the tactical plan, the things you do. And I showed you in the second half of the talk all the things that I tried to do. And then you have to be flexible because life changes, physical health changes, priorities change. And so you're going to need to basically throw out some of your tactical plans when they don't work. You may need to refine some of your strategic retirement plans because things change in your life. So you just have to maintain a flexibility. So it's basically this loop of, your experiences. I bring in my diary, all the data. And so for me, I've settled on this mantra. It is now my time for my retirement. I'm going to do what I need to do to have a happy, healthy, and fulfilling retirement. And for different people, it's going to be different things. For some people, it's making Thanksgiving dinner and Christmas dinner, and that's it. And that's what makes them happy. For others, it's going to be a lot more. So with that, I thank you